One of the really cool things about designing cruise ships is how they design cruise ships. They don't come out of a magazine. They're not just copy and paste from the last one. Every Royal Caribbean cruise ship has its own, not only DNA to it, but even its own feel and venues that we've come to expect. Oh, been there, done that. Nope. They get revamped and retouched in a lot of cases with ships within even the same class. And one of the companies that Royal Caribbean has been relying on for decades is Wilson Butler Architects, who's worked for almost 3 decades to help Royal Caribbean really push the boundaries of what's possible on a ship. And on this week's episode, we've got three members of the team joining us here. First of all, we have Scott Butler, who's the co-founder of the firm. Scott, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
We also have Ben Marcionik, who's a principal at Wilson Butler Architects,
Hello.
and Kelly Charadana, principal and senior interior designer. Kelly, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, thanks.
So, Wilson Butler Architects has been working with Royal Caribbean for decades to help design their ships. And I really wanted to start with a fun story because the Oasis class, first known as Project Genesis, had a few ideas that didn't make the final cut. There were things like the Ocean Pass, the Coral Strand, and Market Pier. So, let's start off with this. I would love to hear some. Tell us more about these never realized concepts. What does the alternate universe have on the Oasis class that we never got to see?
I don't know if maybe I can start
Sure.
just because you're going way back in time here for maybe all of us. Um, when we did work on this project, we were sort of given a fairly blank slate with this open atrium ship concept. And so we were given the opportunity to really just kind of express whatever we thought would be interesting. So being somewhat new still, I think we were only about 7 years into our experience with Royal. We thought we'd sort of try some new names. So the Ocean Pass was kind of the main atrium, open atrium space, and eventually became Central Park, I
Hmm.
presume. And then the Coral Strand was, the equivalent of the Royal Prom. And
Hmm.
then lastly, the Market Pier became the boardwalk. So while those original names might have had a slightly different mix, I don't think we had quite envisioned the Central Park yet and putting all the landscape on. It was a sort of beginning of the idea of really organizing and thinking about the ship in neighborhoods. So while we didn't get a chance to use those three names and maybe develop the concepts in that direction, I think it was very meaningful for the neighborhood concept.
And it sounds like that's a fairly, I would say, common trend with the design. Like you start off with design A, and then maybe you evolve that design B, design C. There's an evolution of these things. Is it fair to say it's rare that you start off with like one idea and it remains that vision from the get-go?
I would say fairly rare, yes. But it does give us a drawer full of ideas to use later.
Yeah, it reminds me a lot. I think Disney Imagineering, to borrow a phrase, they say like no good ideas ever disappear or go away. They just get put to the side and brought back later on. So it sounds like, Ocean Pass, Pearl Strand, Market Pier started as one vision, but it evolved over time. And Ben, talk to us about the collaborative effort, because I'm sure a lot of these things, no matter what ship you're talking about, even the Icon class, there's got to be a lot of back and forth, not only logistically, but also just imagining, right? What people like as an idea.
Yeah, it's funny. When I looking at kind of the whole history of it all, the seeds of the ideas come from very unexpected, places or even, who's working on the project. So, it's certainly not us every time coming up with every idea. Sometimes the shipyard is coming up with these ideas. You have people coming in with all different experience from all different angles, and sometimes some of the best ideas come from the most kind of unexpected conversations and collaboration. So it really is what makes it so fun, actually,
Mhm.
is to kind of see what sticks and then have these meetings and then it's a lot of fun, actually, and that's what makes it so great.
Scott, you brought up Central Park as obviously what ended up being one of those ideas. Central Park was really interesting. The history of it, it was an idea that for the Oasis class, that's where it first debuted, but it had a lot of challenges and almost didn't work. So what was that project like?
Well, I mean, initially the concept was it was going to be these rolling hills. So of grass. And we actually, at the time, had already sort of proposed for a celebrity ship, the lawn club concept. So, in a sort of joint effort, we went to the University of Florida to investigate sort of whether we could get grass to grow on a ship.
Hmm.
And during that exercise, the determination was after having really experimented on both flat lawns, which we were envisioning for the one ship, and then these rolling hills for Oasis. We discovered that not only were rolling hills hard to maintain with grass, but it was also down inside the atriums.
Hmm.
And so we weren't getting enough sunlight in to grow the grass. So it became apparent. They said, "Yeah, we can actually even deal with watering grass with salt sea spray, and we had a whole sort of integral irrigation, but we need sunlight."
Hmm.
So at the end of the day, we got the lawn on the Celebrity, the sister brand, but on the Royal brand, they said we got to come up with a new concept. And oh, by the way, we keep referring to this as like a park. We better come up with something meaningful. So that's when we really went and sort of at the 11th hour did this wholesale reinvestigation of developing it into these very lush gardens and then finding, of course, plants that were going to be much more shade tolerant, even introducing trees, which we hadn't really fully imagined, and doing a lot of very last minute work to even get sort of recesses in the steel structure so we could put, the right size boxes in, and then coming up with this whole container garden that was eventually has been on all the Oasis and now on the Icon class ships and a huge success.
Yeah, I was really impressed, quite frankly, with the Central Park look on the Icon classes. I've seen them all on the Oasis class, and I was like, oh, not that I've been there, done that, but certainly this is what I'm known to expect. And I thought that was really, you guys reached the pinnacle there. And then I saw Icon, I was like, oh wow, this is so much like this feels like even more like a park, really incredible. So it really is a testament to your ability to, again, as I said earlier, it's not just copy and paste. It's not like, oh, we need Central Park and an Icon, bam, let's just take the same thing we've been doing. It's this push to continue to make it better, so to speak, and evolve the concepts.
Definitely. And there's a lot of pressure, like I think we often envision being even more radically different, but because you've sort of created such a strong following of people who really appreciate Central Park on the Oasis class, they weren't ready to abandon the idea of doing it again.
Hmm.
So the big changes were sort of opening up the window over top of the Pearl so you could actually see out to the ocean from Central Park, creating an even sort of denser amount of plantings within the space. And of course, with all of the technology for plants, even sort of growing the living walls and all of that, we could make the whole thing even more immersive. And then adding more sort of topography to the park was a big improvement.
Yeah, the I would say when you go on a ship that's had Central Park living for a couple of years and you see the difference in the like you just said, it's got the walls growing and how
Mhm.
much further along the flora is. It's really incredible, especially like on an Oasis or an Allure compared to Utopia or Wonder. It really stands out. But talk about the Icon class. How did you approach designing the Icon class? Because it was a white paper ship, and it actually sounds a little bit like the Oasis class in that sense that you kind of have this blank slate to start with. So. I don't know if that's like a great thing or a terrible thing as an architect. Like you're going got no guardrails on this. Is that like the it's the is it it's the what is it, the best of tale of two cities kind of situation, right? The best of times and the worst of times.
Yeah. Uh, it's a challenge for sure. And the more experience we get, I feel like sometimes the client Royal worries more that we aren't going to come with fresh ideas. So we have to challenge ourselves internally because unfortunately we know too much about operations. We know too much about building ships. We've just got too much knowledge that we can't be quite as harebrained as we need to be.
Yeah,
And in fairness, they do bring on outside designers for every project. So that
right.
constantly brings in fresh ideas and new perspectives on it. So I think for us, we did try some very radical things in the layout of the ship. Like instead of having just a central atrium down the middle, could we sort of get atriums that cross the ship so you could sort of see out either side? I mean, you find out, of course, as you go through those exercises that, the structural engineer and naval architects aren't quite sure the ship will hold together when you divide it that way in that direction, because it has to act like a big beam on the ocean. But you do sort of open opportunities, which is really how we were able to carve out that large glass into the Royal Prom and really let all that natural light in. So there are always ideas that come out of it, and it's worth kind of going that path and just being as radical as you can be. And even though sometimes it feels like, 80 or 90% of your concepts are kind of diminished back to something familiar, it does allow us still to push the boundaries significantly.
Yeah, what's Kelly and Ben, feel free to jump in here with this with the Icon class and what's your experience like with coming at this project? Again, it must have been just like an enormous opportunity because again, you're not coming in at it like, oh, we're doing the sixth and fifth Oasis class, so we have these kind of curtails. I would imagine that would be kind of, for an architect that'd be fairly exciting.
Yeah, I mean, I did some of the initial concept development as well for Icon, and like Scott said, it's you definitely need to challenge yourself to come up with new ideas and doing a lot of research and finding ways to kind of become inspired and really figuring out how to tell the story conceptually for each of the venues that we're designing. Absolute Zero is a great example. We took our cues from the ice rink being in the center of the space and kind of came up with this idea of journeying through this ice cave and eventually discovering this beautiful, expansive winter icescape. So just coming up with these awesome concepts and then figuring out how to turn them into reality. Collaborating with everyone, like Ben said, to make that vision come true. So yeah, I mean, it was an incredible experience working on that ship.
Ben, any thing you want to add to that?
Well, no, I think we've maybe even talked about it before, is guest flow is a big part of it. And, I
Yeah.
think looking at the previous ships and then how technology has evolved over time, when Scott mentions the neighborhoods, a big part of kind of the evolution of Icon was guest flow. So using the neighborhoods as a very big, broad kind of navigation tool, but then also getting into the real detail of how the new lift cores and the elevators are going to work with destination control, very strategically placed staircases and things. So, it's always something that we're looking at from a very early, point in the master planning and trying to follow that through, all the way and learning things as they go along. So
Yeah.
you find, on the sister ships, you find that as time goes on, you find the bottlenecks, you improve it, you move venues around, you move things, put stairs in. And so
If
it's a big part of the learning process as well.
if Wilson Butler Architects is responsible for the amazing guest flow on the Icon class, you guys deserve like a Nobel Prize of like ship architecture because I mean I cannot understate it and who's not been on one yet. It is amazing how uncrowded that ship feels and how easy it is to get around, especially if you've been on an Oasis class ship, which has its bottlenecks and challenges. So if that's on you guys, I mean, a round of applause all around. That was amazing.
Not just us. I mean, of course,
Yeah,
it's everybody. I mean,
of course.
shipyard and all the, Kone and the lift, a lot of analysis goes into it. And on Royal's side,
Yep.
yeah, certainly whole teams of people working for years to really try to understand it and get it right. So yeah, thanks.
Roughly how many years before a ship welcomes on its first passenger will you, Wilson Butler Architects, start working on a ship design?
Quite a while.
I'm
Yeah.
Yeah, I
I
was
mean,
going to
Scott
say,
can,
I think it's, if you look at a ship like Icon, we actually were contacted in 2016, and that came out in 2024. So while it
Hmm.
wasn't the full 8 years, it was the better part of 7.5 years. Um, and that was, obviously affected by the pandemic. So
Sure.
that added several years to I'd say for the most part, we're probably somewhere in the 5 to 6 year range. And again, a lot of the times we're involved even before there's a contract with the shipyard. And even on some of the early ships, we were working with Royal Caribbean on the master planning and actually shopping it between different shipyards. And we were sort of giving general guidance. It's kind of what we like to refer to our our master plans are, they're more of a roadmap. We
Mm.
aren't going to pretend that we're naval architects and designing the ship. That's the yard's responsibility. But we can tell them, where are the anchors, what are the aspirations. Obviously, there's a specification on how many staterooms, but it's an exercise we went through to really try and then challenge the yards to come up with their own creative solutions for the actual product. So yeah, so we get involved very early, and that also, it affords us a real opportunity as well to sort of push the limits.
That's great. We have a couple questions here from our readers, and I wanted to include them here because I thought they were kind of fun. I asked our readers, I was like, what would you want to ask? We wrote an article, and if you're listening to this podcast, we wrote an article and did an interview there, and we had a lot of great follow-ups there. So I want to share two of them with you. First of all, we'll start with Kelly. Kelly, what is your favorite part of the job?
I think, again, going back to that conceptual design, really, really developing the story, and telling the story, and then seeing how it comes to reality. So again, collaborating with everyone and working on creating a space that really, when you walk into the space, you understand the concept the second you walk into that space, and you're kind of fully enveloped in it. For me, that's my favorite part.
Scott?
I actually, I know this sounds maybe unusual, but I love the collaboration part, and beyond our office. And I
Mhm.
think that's where I think our office is a very open, very transparent way of working. And to what Ben said earlier, you never know where ideas will come from, and we've had great ideas come from uh, Ari Niemela, who's the head structural engineer at Meyer Werft, or we've had great ideas come from Kone, and some of the studies that we did with the destination control systems. So I just love it where, and again, it doesn't have to be our idea. It's more figuring out how do we develop it and how do we collaborate, and you get a much sort of richer outcome if you really do. And we're sort of maybe the anti-star architects. We're the we're the ones who it took us 28 years to get credit for some of the things we've done, but our longevity is, I think, our greatest, thing we're most proud of.
Wonderful. Ben?
Yeah, I mean, kind of picking up where I was saying before about, I know we keep saying collaboration, but on the back end, I really enjoy working with the shipyards and the kind of set offices and the teams that are following through. So, when you think about the detailed design and, as we call it, post design, after all the drawings have been submitted, then we'll work very closely with the outfitters, and they all have just amazing ways of doing things just slightly differently. And it's a lot of fun because, we only can take it to a certain level, but as Scott pointed out, it's kind of the shipyard's responsibility to really get to that, buildable drawing. And it's a lot of fun kind of going to the shipyards and really working through it all, including mock-ups and really, really fun things to go see in person. It's
So
really great.
awesome. So this is an interesting question. We kind of touched a little bit upon it, but as architects and as interior designers and whatnot, is it easier to design a new ship because it's more of an open book of possibilities, like the white paper we were talking about earlier, or is it easier to design a ship within the class because there are more guardrails and expectations in place? So maybe it just makes your job, well, easier.
Like, who would like to go first? I think we have a lot of we're doing a lot of kind of rewrites right now. I think, and one of the things you think might actually be really easy is working with the guardrails, as you mentioned, but it's can be quite difficult implementing a new concept on a space that originally wasn't really designed that way.
Yeah.
Right. So, the brands obviously want to refresh and redo new concepts. And when you try to apply that to a space that was originally very purpose-built, especially the entertainment spaces that we
Mhm.
work on, right? So all the technical equipment and everything was very, very specifically designed around a particular show, for example. So to come in on a sister ship and then put a whole new concept in, it can be quite challenging to do that. Whereas, you might have, I would say, a little bit more control on the prototypes to place things, right?
I don't personally feel like one is easier than the other. I
Hmm.
think both both types of projects have their challenges and both can be very rewarding. It's exciting to have a completely blank slate and come up with all these wonderful ideas and take whatever we visualize and turn it into something real. Um, but Ben had mentioned the Revite projects, coming into a space that's a little dated, 10 years old, and giving it new life is also very, very exciting and very rewarding too. So I didn't really answer the question, but they're both difficult in their own ways. So
Yeah, the one thing I will say, I think the nice thing about the revites, and I think we enjoy it periodically, is the turnaround. It's so much faster that you get to see results so much sooner.
Hmm.
And I also think having the guardrails is kind of fun. I mean, I appreciate what Ben's saying, that it does present its own challenges, but at the same time, when you can successfully kind of refresh a space and really come out with something that becomes a new attraction, I mean, it can be just as satisfying as, because otherwise, we're waiting 5 to 6 years to see the results. So, it's very nice every now and then. And the other thing too is, I think the revites afford us different opportunities. It's a marathon every time you kind of go into a ship from the very beginning, and you have to be willing to sort of sustain a lot of opinions coming from all kinds of different angles. And when you're working in a shorter time frame, you've got fewer opportunities for people to give you their opinion. So you have to. So that's kind of, as much as I love collaboration, when you get
Yep.
too many people in the room, it's also hard to make a decision.
As a former developer for common computer, scope creep is a real thing, and it can the longer you give them. Yep, absolutely, Scott. It's funny. The interesting thing to me always about the revites, and revites, by the way, for those listening, that's revitalization, amplifications, refurbishments, whatever you want to call them. Is a lot of the spaces blow me away how much bigger they are when you all work on these spaces and transform them, whether it's taking an entertainment space and becoming a bar, or it's just incredible to me how you can take a space. I was just on Freedom of the Seas, and Vintages was the old space, and now it's a casino, but it's massive, and I don't remember Vintages being that large. It's like, it's just interesting to me how you can little tweaks like that, like a space like that, but you can radically make it look very, very different. And I'm sure you're, looking forward to some of the new amplifications for the ships coming next year as well. I mean, it's really impressive. And I think for guests also, it kind of is like the first question people always ask is, what was here before? Because you can't like even visualize like what it was. It's not just new wallpaper. I mean, it is like gutted to the bone and redone and rethought, and it's really, really smart. So kudos to you guys.
Thanks. I don't know if we can take credit for that particular
no.
one,
Right.
but but I appreciate what you're saying, and I think they'll see, when Solstice comes out after her revite, there will be some very substantive changes, sort of in what was normally known as the entertainment court. So I think,
Mhm.
and that will take on a completely new character, which will, of course, now align with a lot of what the Edge class has been doing. So, I mean, that's a large part of it too. Is not, obviously there's a purpose for some of this, because we, are trying to sort of reinforce the brand and really
Yeah.
help the brands, create a stronger identity, and the revites are a big part of that.
Scott, I wanted to ask you one last question before we get going over here. It wasn't on the list, but you just reminded me of something when you're talking about, the ships within the same class, right? And I know that you guys, Ben and I, were talking before the broadcast, and we're talking about Celebrity Excel, which is a ship within the Edge class, right? I was thinking about like the Freedom class, which is, I believe, a project you all worked on as well.
Mhm.
Initially, Freedom, Independence, Liberty, they were very similar in look to each other. But it seems like in the last certainly the last 10 years, maybe a little longer than that, it seems like there's been more of a focus to make ships that are deep within the class truly stand out. Excel, Ascent, Beyond on celebrity side, like they're not carbon copies. Utopia, Wonder, not carbon copies. And we're starting to see that now with Star and Legend. Like there
Mhm.
is like it seems, correct me if I'm wrong, Scott, there seems to be more of a discernible push. Like we don't want them to just be never the same, but like there's much more of an emphasis placed on how do we make the same ship class stand out substantially more than it used to. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, it is. I mean, I obviously too, I think there's a greater need, when you're making, it used to be a revite might have been a 25 or, when it was 50, it was $50 million revite was astronomical. But when you're starting to spend, 200 million or 250,
Yeah.
you used to build a ship for that price.
That's a good point.
So you really have to, figure out what the return on investment is. And we generally follow the lead of the brand itself and the product teams because they're very interested and they know where they get the benefit. Obviously, even Freedom as the ship itself was really just the stretch of Voyager. So by putting a whole new section in that was predominantly staterooms and public spaces, there was very little new technical space. It was a very, efficient revenue generator to add those extra staterooms, and that's always a driver on every project we do when we do sister ships. But also, like if you take, for example, Utopia, that one was, they said, you know what, we have a great opportunity with these casinos. We see increasing demand, and if we run this thing as a 3 and a 4 day cruise, you know, we may not, we're pretty likely to get more than 50% of the value of what a 7 day cruise would be. And then, of course, when people are on for such a short period of time and they want to find ways to spend money, well, the casino is a great attraction. I mean, a lot of the high rollers aren't interested in being on a ship for 7 days. They'd rather be in and out over a weekend or something. So they enlarge the casino and increase the revenue, but also they want to go to have parties. They want to have bachelorette parties or bachelor parties. They want to have birthday parties, anniversaries. And really the idea of that sort of long weekend experience, they realized not only will they come on and maybe the ticket price is a bit more, but more importantly, they'll buy more specialty meals or specialty dining or souvenirs. And I think that's become, they identified that, and that is sort of where we would focus, say, on Utopia, which wasn't sort of given the same focus on the prior Oasis class or Harmony class ships.
Absolutely. Well, I really appreciate the time today. It's incredible stuff. I could talk about this for hours and hours. I love this. I love the inside baseball, like, how's the sauce made, and also those, like we said earlier, those cool, the ideas that never were. But really appreciate your time. And I'm going to link in the show notes for this episode to the Wilson Butler Architects Instagram and Facebook page. They actually post a lot of interesting glimpses into their work. Let's put it that way. And if you want to check that out, I think it's a really good way to kind of, if you're like me, it's just like, oh, that's pretty cool. And I have definitely saved some of those images for my own little collection to, keep for a rainy day. But appreciate you all joining us here, and thank you for the insight.
Thank
Thanks for
you.
having us.
Yeah, thank you for having us.
Yeah.
Great conversation.